Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a climate event that is rapidly transforming from a simple weather anomaly into a massive, multi-system global shockwave. We hear about changing weather patterns all the time, right? But what we're looking at for 2026 goes way, way beyond a few extra rainy days or a slightly warmer summer. We're tracking a major fundamental disruption.
$84 trillion. Just let that number sink in for a second. According to researchers at Dartmouth College and the World Bank, this staggering figure represents the potential cumulative global income loss by the end of the 21st century if we don't adapt to these intensifying El Niño cycles. This isn't just about the cost of cleaning up after a single storm. No, this is persistent, compounding economic scarring. It's a scenario where the capital we'd normally use for growth literally gets permanently diverted just to basic survival and repair.
So it really forces us to ask this critical question: are we actually ready for a 2026 Super El Niño? Because the forecast for 2026 is no longer a matter of if this is going to happen, but how hard it's going to hit. For global industries, for supply chains, and for local communities everywhere, this is gearing up to be a massive systemic stress test.
Which brings us to Section 1 of our explainer, the epicenter, the Pacific Ocean.
To really grasp the economic and ecological carnage heading our way, we first have to look at the massive engine driving the whole thing. The deep reds and oranges expanding across the central and eastern Pacific reveal an ocean that is practically boiling. In a normal year, trade winds push warm water west, right? Well, those winds have weakened, allowing this massive trapped pool of heat to just slosh right back toward the Americas. These June 2026 sea surface temperature anomalies are fundamentally rerouting the atmospheric jet streams that dictate the weather for the entire planet.
Now let's make sure we define our terms here. When we say a super El Niño, we aren't just throwing around some media buzzword. We're talking about a very specific, extreme scientific threshold. It's a state where temperatures in a key monitoring area, known as the Niño 3.4 region, exceed 2.0 degrees Celsius above the historical average. And it's that precise, extreme level of excess heat that triggers the absolute most chaotic disruptions to our global weather.
And the probabilities backing this up? Honestly, they're staggering. Official data from NOAA confirms a 63% chance that we'll see a very strong event peaking between November 2026 and January 2027. That puts the current cycle on track to rank among the absolute largest El Niño events in the historical record, going all the way back to 1950.
Okay, let's move to Section 2, the first ripple, ecosystems and extreme weather.
As we move outward from the ocean itself, all of that trapped thermal energy translates directly into our immediate physical environments. And for marine ecosystems, well, this heat is absolutely devastating. The Coral Reef Alliance points out that corals live within an incredibly narrow, delicate temperature range. Just like we saw during the last super event back in 2015 and 2016, sustained increases of just 1 to 2 degrees Celsius disrupt the vital symbiotic relationship between corals and their energy-providing algae. It pushes them right past their survival margins, triggering mass global coral bleaching.
Meanwhile, up on land, the impacts are equally profound, but they do require a little bit of nuance to fully understand. Experts at Australia's National Science Agency, CSIRO, remind us to clearly distinguish between a meteorological drought, which simply means, there's a lack of rain, and an agricultural drought. An agricultural drought is when that lack of rain actually translates into severe economic hardship for farmers, usually due to exhausted soil moisture and failing crop yields.
The crucial takeaway here is exactly what CSIRO's Dr. Andrew Sullivan points out. El Niño doesn't just guarantee identical disasters everywhere. It's a massive amplifier, not a solitary trigger. For example, a super El Niño creates the hot, dry conditions that are perfect for bushfires. But you still need fuel, terrain, and an ignition source to actually start the blaze. Basically, it loads the dice for extreme weather.
And that leads us to Section 3, the second ripple, the global food threat.
As these weather patterns shift around, the anomalies cascade directly into serious agricultural stress. The humanitarian organization World Hunger Health warns of a really stark two-phase contrast in places like the Greater Horn of Africa. On one hand, we're seeing a strong dry signal severely impacting South Sudan, Uganda, and northern Ethiopia. But on the flip side, we might actually see wetter than normal late-year rains in Kenya and southern Somalia. This crazy contrast is heavily influenced by another climate driver called the Indian Ocean Dipole, which interacts directly with El Niño.
Because of these highly localized volatile impacts, agencies are heavily stressing what they call anticipatory action.
We don't have to wait for total certainty to act on this. Right now, specific priority regions across the Sahel, places like Mali, Niger, and Chad, are under urgent monitoring. Teams on the ground are tracking rainfall deficits, soil moisture levels, and staple food prices to help prevent widespread famine before it fully materializes.
Next up, Section 4, the outer ripple, the global economy.
Ultimately, you have to remember that these localized crop failures and ecosystem shocks don't happen in a vacuum. They merge into a massive macroeconomic storm, bringing us to a critical modern economic term you're going to want to know: climateflation. This is an inflationary engine that is entirely detached from standard monetary policy. When extreme heat drops Thai rice yields by 15%, the price doesn't just go up in Bangkok, it ripples out. It triggers food security crises, alters trade balances, and hits consumer wallets worldwide, which then puts intense pressure on central banks everywhere to hike interest rates.
Let's trace exactly how this builds into an absolute logistical nightmare. Say a lack of rain linked to El Niño hits Panama, dropping the canal's water levels by an astounding 36%. Suddenly, daily transits plummet. Ships are forced into massive detours all the way around Cape Horn, adding 10 to 14 days to their journeys. This completely explodes the cost of shipping everything, from the fertilizer that farmers desperately need right down to the everyday consumer goods sitting on your local store shelf.
Across the board, major global industries are facing severe, immediate balance sheet risks. We're talking agribusiness, facing a projected 3.5% drop in regional output. Logistics companies dealing with massive 15% spikes in freight rates. And real estate? They're looking at insurance premium hikes of 20% or more. It just proves that El Niño is a persistent drag on global GDP. It's definitely not just a passing storm we can wait out.
Which brings us to our final section, adapting to the storm. Now, despite this daunting $84 trillion shadow hanging over the century, we aren't completely powerless here. We do have tools to pivot from vulnerability to active resilience, starting with our oceans. The Coral Reef Alliance emphasizes that healthy, well-managed reefs actually can survive and adapt to heat events. But they need our help. By aggressively reducing local human-made stressors, things like improving water quality and tightly managing tourism pressure, we give these incredibly vital ecosystems the breathing room they desperately need to survive the temperature spike.
And for businesses and global supply chains, surviving this cycle means aggressively mapping out your climate bottlenecks today. If your business relies on a single source supplier located in a known flood or drought zone, you are directly exposed to El Niño-grade volatility. Adapting means diversifying those supply chains right now before the crisis hits peak intensity.
And that brings us to the end of this explainer. Knowing that extreme climate risk is no longer just a rare anomaly, but a permanent baseline that we all have to plan around, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Are we finally ready to stop treating our environment as some separate external factor and start treating it as the very foundation upon which our entire global economy sits?